Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Employment and Paralysis webinar. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded Wednesday, April 17, 2013. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Gary Karp. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am this person. In 1973, I was injured in a fall from a tree and have a spinal cord injury at T12. And I already had work experience. I grew up working in my father's drugstore. I also, starting when I was a teenager, worked for a photographer. And here you actually see me in the photographer's studio where after my rehabilitation, I actually went back and worked there for a little while. Work has always been part of my life over the now almost 40 years since my injury. And now here you see me a little more recently with a little less hair and a little more gray. I graduated architectural school and I worked in architecture briefly, but I followed a career in graphic design where I spent 11 years before I started my own work, which I do now as an author, journalist, speaker, trainer, and so on disability. I am the author of this book, Life on Wheels, on the left, which is a guidebook, which is the real comprehensive, really clear, here's how people do this. And part of the success employment, of course, is getting well trained and prepared and the resources that you need and developing the skills in order to live well as a person with paralysis. And that's what that's the offering that I made with this book. There to Here is about to be re-released as an ebook, and it's a collection of essays by people with spinal cord injuries about their process of how they went from that moment of traumatic change in their life to the integrated quality of life they're living now. Many of these stories, of course, deal with employment. So we got a set of goals for today's session. Why exactly are we here? Well, first and foremost, to give you confidence, to give you a sense of how it is that it is possible to return to work, to continue to work, to seek work, to begin to work, depending, of course, the age you are and what's happening in your life at the time. But for you to get a sense that, yes, it really is possible for you to be successful in the workplace with paralysis. We're going to talk a little bit about the culture of work and its nature and how it tends to see and respond to people with disabilities. We're going to discuss very briefly the legal environment. It's important to have an understanding of, for instance, the Americans with Disabilities Act and how that relates to you and your rights with regard to the workplace. We're going to talk about the employer's point of view, because the better you understand what the employer's priorities are, what their concerns are, the lens through which they might be seeing you, then the more likely you'll be successful in employment. We'll talk a little bit about the process of getting hired and keeping the job, if not being promoted. We're also going to talk a little bit about assistive technologies for those of you that's relevant. So first of all, there's a real core question here. Why work? What are the reasons that we are interested in working? Well, independence is number one. It provides us with a greater level of independence, and certainly it's been my own experience. Exactly because of whatever degree of independence I lost, whatever is possible for me became that much more crucial. So that mindset of pursuing the most independent possible life is what this conversation is about, and work is a very important piece of that. Work is a place where we get the opportunity to grow as individuals. Work is a place where we develop skills, where we learn, where we evolve, and not a lot of other settings that provide us that. And that kind of growth, that kind of accomplishment, that kind of sense of being productive and valuable and contributing is a component that really contributes to our personal sense of self and our self-esteem, not to mention better income than living on Social Security or being dependent on other people. Making your own money and making a good income certainly is preferable. But some people get trapped. It's common for people who acquire a spinal cord injury through some kind of accidental event, go through a court experience or deal with an insurance company and often get some settlement money, sometimes a lot of settlement money. But this process takes time. And while that is going on, it's very common for people to have to sit in a courtroom and listen to how terribly compromised and damaged their life has become by paralysis, because that's what the lawyer wants to get across in order to get you the most money. Some people are actually told, do not work. Do not give the impression that you don't need so much of a settlement. And so this is a bit of a trap. On one hand, you are capable of working. As soon as people get reasonable rehabilitation and have made the effort and taken the time to master the skills of living with paralysis, regardless of the level of your injury, by the way, but then you find yourself having to put off pursuing education or employment for the sake of a settlement process, then that gets in your brain. You sit there hearing it, and the danger is that you're going to have a hard time getting out there and working once this whole process is over with. So it's complicated. I don't quite know what, I'm not going to advise to do this or not do it, but just know that you must not lose that belief, that factual knowledge that it is possible for you to work. And as soon as it is possible for you, that you want to pursue it and find out what's possible for you. So the culture of work. First and foremost, it's a culture of professionalism. It's about taking seriously why you're there and that you're there to do a good job above all else. There's this history of hire the handicapped, as if somehow the world is supposed to do us a favor by giving us work, or that because of whatever impairments we work with, that maybe we should be entitled to a little bit of slack. That is really not a productive attitude. You should be thinking in terms of, I'm going to do as good a job as anybody else, and I can do a good job, as good a job as anybody else. And to believe otherwise, in fact, in the workplace, they might very well, it might work the other way around. They might lower the bar for you, saying, well, we don't want to overburden you because we understand you have a disability. That's an attitude that you should not accept, because you want to show that you are capable. And if you are not doing the kind of work that anybody else would be doing, you're also less of a candidate for promotion. And you want to evolve. You want to grow. You want to learn. You want to show them also that you're trustworthy, that when you're asked to do something that you're going to do it, that when you are expected to keep company information to yourself, that they know that you are going to do that, and so on. You got to show up for work on time. I know these are basic things, but it's important to lay this foundation. And that you're going to be somebody that your manager, the company owner, or, whoever you work with, including your colleagues, that you are somebody that they can communicate with, that they can talk with you about what's going on, about the priorities of the company and the organization and the job, and also communicate with you about things that you might need to understand in order to do your job better. And last of all, that you're going to be able to take that kind of guidance. You're going to be able to take input about what will improve your job. Not criticism, but good managers will come to you and say, here's a performance issue, and what can I do to help you get there? You're looking for a workplace where that kind of capable, collaborative working relationship is in place, because that's what makes an organization work best. So why are you there? Well, you're there first and foremost to help them succeed. They're not hiring you for you. They're hiring you for the organization, for the profit goals of a for-profit company, for the mission, they call it, in government. And you are part of that process. And that needs to be your attitude as well. I am here to be part of the success of this organization. And they're going to make an investment in you. They're going to hire you. They're going to provide you training. They are going to support you with perhaps technologies that you might need, or accommodations that you might need. But mainly, they are choosing you because they expect you to contribute to the success of the company, and that requires them to make an investment in you. You want to find work that you enjoy. Notice we're not really talking that much about paralysis, really. We're really talking about starting with an understanding that you're putting yourself out in the workplace in the same way that everybody else is, and that you want to find work that you like to do. You're going to spend a long time doing it. You hope that you'll stay with your organization for a while instead of being out on the job market repeatedly and having to go through the process of finding jobs and getting used to the new place. And you want to have a good time doing it. It's good for your spirit when you enjoy your work, and it's not always easy to find work that you actually like doing, but it should be a priority for everybody that you're interested in the work that you're going to do. When you're interested in the work and you enjoy the work, then you're also going to show a greater spirit in the workplace, and employers and managers are certainly happy to see that. Here's a person who we've brought into a position, and they're happy to be there, and that you are well qualified for it. You have to make that case when you are either interviewing for or returning to a job that you might have been in before, that you are still capable of performing that job. And then, of course, you have to actually demonstrate that when you're actually on the job and working. And better yet, work that's meaningful for you. Some people are more than happy to have a job that provides them a proper income and an environment that they're comfortable in. Other people, perhaps you're somebody who feels like you want to do some work that actually is making a positive difference in the world in some way. So you have to consider where you are personally on that spectrum and allow that to be a factor in what you pursue in terms of the work that you'll be doing. Now, once somebody hires you, there is a training period. You've got to learn the ropes. There's a ramp-up process before you become productive. Perhaps a technology that you need to use, you need to be learning on the spot, and it might take you a little longer to get up to speed with that. But know that the employer is concerned about this, because when you are ramping up, you're not as productive, and they need you to get to full productivity as soon as you can. And that training ramp-up process is not always fun. Very often we experience that as, we're not competent because we don't know what we're doing yet. But really keep in mind that moving through that experience of not being competent quite yet and learning and gaining the skills and mastering the fine points, that's really the good part, because that gets you to competence, and that's when it feels great. So don't let a sense of, I'm not sure that I'm competent while I'm learning this in the beginning, stop you from being committed to learning. Employers love to see that. Somebody who really wants to learn the job, who really wants to learn the organization, who really wants to get good at what it is that they're there to do and with the tools that they're going to use to be able to do it. So just suspend judgment for a little while during that ramp-up time and focus only on what it takes to do the job well, and in the context of your paralysis, learning what it takes to foster the most accessible environment that you need, to make sure that you're taking care of your body. We'll talk about that more in a bit. To deal with the process of everybody in the office getting to know you, getting to understand what your preferences are in terms of etiquette for, you want them to open doors or not? Do you need them to keep their shoes out of the aisles? That's kind of part of the process too, is if they're not accustomed to somebody who is a wheelchair user, then you might have a ramp-up process around just the culture of the workplace and everybody sort of getting used to that. And again, you want to do all that without judgment. It's just something that everybody needs to learn because they might not be used to it, right? Okay. So when we are recently paralyzed, in the beginning, it's a very, very common thing to feel like our paralysis is a much larger part of our identity than it really is, which translates into we think that that's what everybody sees, that that's what everybody is focused on. And that in the workplace is going to create a little bit of internal tension because you're occupying your thoughts with wondering maybe what people think. You're occupying your thoughts with maybe, is my employer doubting that I'm able to be productive, that I can do the job just because I'm a person using a wheelchair. But they're mirroring you. What you think and how you behave and what you demonstrate about your own sense of your own disability actually has an effect on how other people are going to see you and treat you. So the process and the exercise here is to continue to gain a deeper and deeper and more clear belief in yourself and your ability to do the job and the ability to be independent. And you'll find that the more you can let go of all that other stuff, that concern that they are seeing you too much in terms of their disability, then that's when they're actually more likely to get beyond it and to see you for the person that you are and what you have to contribute, which is what you want to be demonstrating. Because when you show up and allow yourself to shine, your disability disappears. Some of you may have already experienced that once you connect with a person and you start communicating or being active together in whatever it is that you have in common, whatever reason that you are connected to each other, then all of a sudden the wheelchair and your paralysis becomes a non-issue. The more you can believe in that and the more you let go of concern about that, then the more likely it is to happen. Now, there's a little problem in the workplace, in workplace culture, just around the very language, the very word. Disability in the workplace means you can't work. Disability is something that you go on. There is a whole world out there of disability benefits, from long-term disability to Social Security to workers' compensation, and so on. So in the culture of work, there's this confusion about disability. You're somebody who identifies as disabled, but you're telling me that you can work. And that can cause a little bit of confusion, or people can simply have doubts about your ability to work because they're trapped in this paradigm of thinking about disability in terms of not being able to work. But what's really happening here is they're just operating on the basis of some stereotypes that are ingrained in society. But these are stereotypes such as you have a disability, so that means you can't work. Right? Common stereotype. But they're starting to shift because more and more people with disabilities are out there, are working. We all know that there are more and more wheelchair users that are out in our daily public life. And we are all part of a process of this historical continuum, literally, of demonstrating to everybody that no, being paralyzed does not preclude independence and active living and contributing in every milieu of our society, from our families to our communities and certainly in the workplace. So simply understand that rather than you're being discriminated against or you're being improperly judged, that people have this stuff that's deeply ingrained in their brains because it's in our society. And some of those people haven't yet had the experience of being able to find out that these stereotypes no longer fit the reality. And, maybe we don't appreciate being in the position where we have to be the ones to do this, but this is the way, I personally have always felt about it, is that, this is the time that we live in. Things are changing in a positive way, and that just means that I am in a position, therefore, where I get to demonstrate what it really means to have a disability. And rather than resent it, I just take it as what my life is about as a person with a disability. And I would rather model this and bring about change in the workplace than back up. But these stereotypes really are pretty deeply ingrained. And we see it in this table here. This is from a survey that was done by ODEP. I don't have it on the slide, so I'll do it like this. The Office of Disability. Oh, I'm outside of the slide. No wonder it works. It doesn't work. Let's try this again. ODEP is the Office of Disability Employment Policy. It's a group in the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. Boy, I'm doing a terrible job at this, aren't I? I'm just trying to make use of the little toy that I can play with. Office of Disability Employment Policy. I'm putting it up here because you do want to go to odep.gov, and there's a lot of great information there about employment. And a lot of useful information for you. But ODEP did this survey. That's what this table is from. And they did a survey of employers. 3,797 companies were asked about what their concerns are about hiring people with disabilities. And we get, first of all, that it costs more. And look at this, almost 60% of companies are concerned that hiring a person with a disability is going to cost them more money. Workers with disabilities lack the experience, the skills to be able to do the jobs that they need done. Right? Well, sitting and not being able to walk or having limited use of your hands has nothing whatsoever to do with education and training and experience that you might already have had behind you or that you gain, following your paralysis. And once again, a very large number of employers, 49.4% from companies of all sizes, have this concern. There's concern out there about safety, about supervisors are not sure how to assess and discipline somebody if they have severe performance problems. Not sure how to evaluate you, I just said how to assess you. Or that literally supervisors are uncomfortable with managing you. Fortunately, that's the lowest one, but still it's almost a third of them reported that kind of concern. So that the environment that you're going into out there is populated by people, managers, hiring people who might not be convinced of these things, but they have them as questions. And so that's why it's your role just to be the best you can be, to present yourself as who you are and what you're interested in and how you're going to contribute to the company and how you'll do the job. And these things disappear when you're actually on the job and doing the job well. So there are people in the workplace who really get this, though. Human resources recruiters need to bring in as many qualified employees as they can. And that means that they're interested in knowing about you. They are interested in bringing in anybody who's capable, regardless of whether they have a disability, because a disability does not necessarily preclude being able to perform many, many jobs out there, especially in our information-based economy where work is far more often about computing and not about physical labor. Another group that's interested in this is diversity professionals. Diversity historically, of course, has been about gender and ethnicity and LGBT issues. And increasingly, the diversity world is starting to realize that people with disabilities are not just those people who go on benefits, but people who are part of the diversity spectrum, which, of course, is really clear to us, but they're still getting a grip on this. But within organizations, there are diversity professionals who are doing work to help workplace culture move forward to an understanding that they need to embrace people with disabilities as qualified employees. Disability management are the people who used to actually manage the benefits, but they understand that they save their money, employers, when they keep somebody on a job. So when you are somebody who acquired a disability while you were already an employee somewhere, the disability management people are motivated to find a way for you to be able to return to your job and stay on it as effectively as possible, because it's much, much cheaper than going out and finding somebody else and then training them and hoping that they work out and possibly having to do it all over again. So these are the people within companies who are more likely to understand issues of employment and disability, and that to whatever degree you get the opportunity, you want to connect with them. Okay. Now here's an example of somebody who certainly flies in the face of all of these doubts and beliefs. Rhett was injured when he was 16 years old. He is quadriplegic in the C3 range or so. He has no use of his hands or arms, but you see he's using a mouse stick. He went to college. He got himself an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration, and we see Rhett here working for a bank as a loan officer. And he simply does things the way he does things. He works with a mouse stick. He told me that in the morning, people simply bring out the files that he needs to work with over the course of his day, lay it out on this special table that they designed for him, which in the corner here, this is actually a turntable that actually rotates around. And of course, you see his computer over here. So Rhett has got what he needs to be able to do his job, and until somebody actually comes in to have to meet him for some reason in person to sign papers or something of that sort, they don't even know that he's a person with quadriplegia. So if somebody like Rhett can do work like this, then it certainly demonstrates to me that lots of people in the paralysis spectrum have all kinds of possibilities for what they can do in the workplace. The situation has been impacted. I say that carefully because, frankly, the employment and disability statistics overall for all types of disabilities have not improved a real great deal since the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we see here with President George H.W. Bush, with Evan Kemp right here on the left, and with Justin Dart, two very significant historic figures in the disability movement, there to witness it. Now, Title II of the ADA speaks directly to hiring and disability. So you have some rights. And the thing to understand first and foremost about the ADA is that it's a civil rights law. It is not a consolation prize. It is not a guarantee of a job. It simply means that it is not legal to discriminate against somebody based on the fact of their having a disability, or on their having a record of a disability, or having a relationship with a disability. The ADA protects, for instance, a parent who has a child with a disability from being discriminated against as if because of that family member now they're no longer able to perform on the job as well. That would be a violation of their rights. In Canada, there is an equivalent to the ADA. Of course, it's not the exact same thing, but it's in the context of their human rights laws. Right? So, actually, I've already given this, but we'll say it one more time, that the ADA protects you from discrimination based on having a disability, on having a record of a disability, or having a relationship with somebody with a disability. Okay, but it's not a guarantee of a job. The only right that you have is to be hired for a job that you are qualified for. Right? I think that it's another stereotype that the ADA is somehow a favor, that somehow it's going to provide people with an advantage of some kind, but there's nothing in the law that even hints at any of that kind of stuff. If you are not qualified for a job that has an appropriate job description, then you can't be discriminated against based just on your disability. Now, of course, that can be a little tricky to prove, but there are plenty of complaints out there, and employers have really taken this to heart. So, do you have a disability under the ADA? The definition of the ADA is that your disability must limit one or more essential life activities. Well, walking is considered an essential life activity, which is kind of interesting because those of us living with paralysis know that we do pretty well without being able to walk. Maybe you're one of those people who likes to say walking is overrated. You know, I've been living with this for almost 40 years, and it turns out that walking was not quite as essential as many people think. But nonetheless, this is the language of the law. And whether or not, whatever you think about whether walking is essential, the fact is that paralysis is stated clearly in the letter of the law as automatically qualifying you for protection under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, language in the ADA, there are a couple of real key phrases, and one of them is reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodation is whatever allows you to perform the essential tasks, quotes, of the job. Now, essential tasks, that comes from the human resources world. When an organization writes a job description, they identify what tasks are absolutely mandatory for you to be able to perform to be qualified for this job. They also talk about desirable skills and tasks, but this idea of essential tasks is really key. So the question is, what reasonable accommodation might you require in order to be able to perform those tasks successfully? That's the way employers think about this stuff. This is the language. This is the way the law presents these kinds of things. So reasonable accommodation is going to be required for tasks that are actually properly described in the job. If the job doesn't have anything to do with, say, delivering things or going out and doing sales, or that you're just going to go to an office and you're going to work there, in that case, the job description cannot require you to have a driver's license, because a driver's license is not a requirement. Driving is not a requirement for the job itself. That's just one example, actually, from a real situation that occurred where an employer put that requirement in every single job description, and it got challenged successfully in court. Okay. So part of the trick here is, what is the job description, and is it actually appropriate? And employers hopefully are doing a good job at that. The other thing about reasonable accommodation is that some employers probably balk at this or wink reasonable. We saw it in the table a few slides back from the survey, that they're afraid that it's going to cost them more to hire you. But reasonable accommodation is not expensive. There's data, very clear numbers that are already in from large data sets of employees with disabilities. Many people with disabilities require accommodations that don't cost anything at all. Many of them don't require any accommodation, period. And for the ones where there is some cost, the vast majority of them are inexpensive, under $1,000, like less than 1%, under $1,000. So employers are still learning about this kind of stuff, and it's one of the things that you want to do, is be part of this process of determining what kind of accommodations you might need, what they would cost. Larger organizations have people who actually work full-time on being the ones who identify what kind of accommodation somebody needs in order to perform the job well, because that's what they care about, and so it's worth it for them to invest. And then there are people who feel that reasonable accommodation is really no different from what an employer does for anybody else. In other words, what do you need to perform this job well? And there's a certain level where that's not even a disability issue. It's just, this is the tool that I need, this is the environment that I need, this is the kind of support that I need, and then I'm going to go out there and I'm going to kill. Not literally, of course. You have to understand that the employer is required to provide accommodation only for things that apply to the actual performance of the essential tasks of the job. Right? So it's not their responsibility to provide you transportation to and from the job. That has nothing to do with the performance of the job. It's up to you to get there. And also, they are not responsible for any personal assistance or attendant kind of needs that you might have, such as toileting during the day. The employer doesn't have to provide you an attendant to assist you in the restroom. That's something that you would be responsible for dealing with on your own. Only things that apply to the performance of the essential tasks of the job. Okay. So the other key phrase, reasonable accommodation being the first, is undue hardship. Something is not reasonable if it's an undue hardship on the company. Well, both of these, frankly, have been through the courts, and they're not very specific, real quantified kind of language. So in this case especially, it can get a little tricky, but mainly undue hardship means that it's not going to put you out of business, or it's not going to or it is going to put you out of business if it's an undue hardship, or it's going to cause you to lose significant clients, or but the burden is on the employer to demonstrate undue hardship. And because of the data that I was just talking about, very few employers can really make that case, unless they're smaller employers can often make the case that, or sometimes, that because of the size of their organization, that they might not be able to. But even then, they're going to be hard-pressed to make the case, because reasonable accommodation is not an expensive thing to do. Now, also understand that there are no quotas for hiring people with disabilities. There's no law that says that anybody has to hire a certain number of people with disabilities. So there's no legal advantage, again, for any of us with a disability out there in the world of work. They don't have to hire us. They should simply want to hire us because we're the right person for the job and we're going to do well. All right, so now let's talk about the interview. The law says that you have a right to an accessible setting for the interview. So when you apply, and when they contact you and you get to the point with an organization where they want to interview you, then you need to identify that I am a person with a disability and this is the accommodation I need for the interview. So again, legally they are required to do that. So to this question, when do you present your disability? I think that you do it right away. And that's personal opinion. There are different feelings about this. But think about it. If you show up for an interview and then they're surprised, then that person has to take a little while to kind of adjust to the new reality they find themselves facing. And they might even wonder, well, why didn't this person tell me? They might wonder whether you feel okay yourself about having a disability. So I think there are very strong reasons. Obviously they're going to find out because you have a visible disability. So you really should let them know right away, because I think that gets you off on the right wheel, if you will, and that there's going to be no difficulty. And if they've got a problem with it, then you get to find out early as well. But it's an opportunity really for you to display confidence, for you to show them that I know exactly who I am, I know exactly what my disability is about in the context of my life. I absolutely am somebody who cares about working and doing a job well. And when an employer sees confidence in you, that is a very, very strong point that will influence them and will help them get past whatever doubts or questions they might have about disability. And you want to open the conversation. They're also nervous because they know that they could violate the law if they say the wrong thing. It's actually not a big problem for them. They're not allowed to ask you about your disability, but they actually don't have to. All they need to know is, how are you going to perform the job? And I've attended workshops with lawyers who talk about this process and actually teaching human resources people and employers in interviews, what do you do? And they say it's so simple. Just don't ask, what's your disability? That's not relevant to the job. What's relevant to the job is, how are you going to perform this? Which is why you want to know what tools and what environment and what processes you might need as a reasonable accommodation, if any, in order to do the jobs. And you want to get that conversation going early, because the sooner you can reassure the employer about those issues, then the sooner you can move on to what you're all there for, the job, the work, success, and so on. Now it's a no-brainer, of course, but you want to dress well when you attend the interview. You want to take the time to get to know about the company, because they're not interested in people who are just interviewing everywhere they possibly can. If you go there and say, I understand this work that you do. I know something about your successes and about your evolution and about your goals and your projects and programs and what you're trying to do here, and I want to be part of it. That goes a long, long way with an employer, because then you're showing them that I want to work here. Maybe not the only place that you feel that way about, but they want to know that you actually care about working for that particular organization instead of, this is just a job and I'm going to take whatever I can get. That does not bode strongly for you in the eyes of an employer. Okay, so let's jump ahead now to talk about assistive technologies. Now, in my case, as somebody in the paraplegia range, I don't really use assistive technology. My wheelchair, of course, is an assistive technology. The hand controls in my car is an assistive technology. But in terms of computing, I use the same technology that everybody else does. But for people who are in the quadriplegia range, who have some limited use of their fingers, their hands, their arms, there certainly are technologies out there, including for people like Rhett, with no use of his hands and arms at all. Now, the assistive technology he was using was a mouth stick. And he was actually quite happy with it. He'd been using it for a long, long time. Before there was such a thing as voice technology, before there was such a thing as head or eye cursors that allow somebody to move the cursor on the screen with movements of their head or the pupil of their eye. Assistive technology is a whole other webinar to be done at some point, but you should be taking the time to get out there and learn what technologies you need in order to be able to perform well in a computing setting. Many rehab centers have assistive technology rooms. There are nonprofit groups all over the place. I'm aware of the Center for Assistive Technology in Berkeley, California. I know that there are plenty all over the place. So seek out local resources to help you identify what technology is optimal for you. Because when you go into a job setting and you know what you need, you are really making life easier for that employer, because that employer is another thing that they get nervous about. And, well, gee, I don't know anything about how you adapt computing. I don't know anything about these weird keyboards. I don't know anything about eye cursors and on-screen keyboards and word prediction technology and all these kinds of things that are so cool and that are so powerful and allow you to work as well, if not better, than anybody else. So when you can relieve the employer of that big question of, oh, how am I supposed to deal with it? Well, your answer is, you don't have to deal with it. I know exactly what I need, and I know exactly how it works. And this is what will allow me to do the job. If you've already received some training in it, then that saves them from the fear that your ramp-up time is going to take longer. And I've met managers who've actually been through this, and they were committed to doing the right thing, and they were not going to let this person go, but they needed to install some voice dictation technology and train them and deal with a much longer period of time that it took for this person before they got productive, which was a challenge for the managers because they had work that they had to get out, and usually they can sort of calculate when somebody's going to get up to speed. So learn it if you can on your own, because again, the more you have to learn while you're on the job, then the cost and the time of ramp up is going to be greater for the employer. Right? Now, you have a protection for reasonable accommodation under the law, but you aren't the one who gets to choose what it is. Again, if you really know the one that works and you have the solution, the employer is probably going to say, great, they know what we need, just tell me what it is and we'll get it. If you don't know, then the employer is the one who might go out there to find out what the options are. They might go out to some consulting. Again, there are nonprofits in the area that actually will go into an employment setting on your behalf in order to do an assessment and to make recommendations. And the employer gets the final decision. If the accommodation allows you to do the job, they have the right of saying, this is the one that you're going to use. So just know that fact of the law. Also, there have been some issues with the information technology department, the IT nerd folks. Pardon me, I hope that wasn't discriminatory in tone, but you know what I'm talking about. The IT folks have got to keep everybody's computers working. They've got to keep everything running. They're the ones who get all the phone calls for all the emergencies when things freeze or shut down or don't do what they're supposed to do. And in the past, there have been some systemic problems when you install certain kinds of technologies. For instance, a different kind of keyboard that requires another driver, or the voice input technology, and the ones that I've been talking about. Sometimes it actually bumps into other things on the computer, and in large corporate settings, they are very, very protective of their computing. They don't allow anybody to install any software on a machine on their own. Everything has to happen through the IT department. And the IT department has to know how that technology works, because if you have a problem, you need to call them. It's less of a problem now because everything has become so advanced and so desktop-based that, and it's been around for long enough. So many of these bugs and compatibility problems have been worked out, but you still need to be aware of this as an issue. If you need something that different, then it's going to have to go through the IT department, and you need to advocate with the IT department to be willing to problem solve if you have a problem. Because if you get locked out because something's bumping in the night, then you can't be very productive, and everybody else is still cranking away, and you might get stuck simply because of an assistive technology issue. So just, again, be aware of this, and you want to foster the best situation you can so that you don't run into that problem. And there are lots of organizations that are out there to provide resources and support. JAN is the Job Accommodation Network, an incredible resource for employers and potential employees. It's a program of ODEP, the Department of Labor. So do some surfing out there and find your way to the Job Accommodation Network website and spend some time there to see what they have. Oh my God, I'm forgetting what employee access. Oh, so sorry, I don't have time on my other machine to jump there and find out. But this is a program that deals with employment and disability in partnership with the folks at come on, Rob, what's the university out there in New Jersey? Starts with a C. Are you listening to me? Can't believe I'm blanking out on that. Okay, it's a senior moment. It will come to me. Project Hired is based in Santa Clara in Southern California, provides tons of services to employers and employees with disabilities, and WorkSafe BC is in British Columbia. Every province up there has, Cornell University, of course, thank you. Every province in Canada has a group of that sort. So there are tons of services out there that can help you and the employer to work this out. So here are just a few examples of actual technologies. This is a keyboard that if you are quadriplegic, you can rest your hands on it. You don't have to carry your hands up in the air. And then you just press gently against the keys in order to make the key work. If you can't use your hands at all, this is an on-screen keyboard that's controlled with an eye or a head cursor. And when you pause the cursor on a key, then it initiates that key, which sounds really, really slow, except the way this works is using all kinds of interesting software, macros and shortcuts, word prediction software, and abbreviation expansion, where when you press one letter, it gives you a list of words, or if you press one or two letters that are built in as an abbreviation, when you hit the space key, it'll go ahead and expand. You can put in whole phrases, you can put in whole paragraphs. People without the ability to use their hands and arms have really gotten this stuff working very, very efficiently, because frankly, a lot of other people never really make the most of the technology that's sitting there right there on their desk. It has all kinds of productivity features that they never bothered to learn. So if you're somebody without the use of your hands and arms who's using this kind of technology, when you commit to squeezing everything you can out of it, you are likely to be doing as well as anybody else is. This is an example of a pretty radical ergonomic keyboard, which is designed for somebody with one hand. There's a left-handed and a right-handed version of it. And also, I want to make a plea to you to take time to learn about ergonomics. Ergonomics is the relationship of your body to your work. You've all heard of carpal tunnel syndrome and tendinitis, and we know that people have back strain and eye strain. Ergonomics is a super critical issue for somebody who's a wheelchair, if only because you're sitting in a chair that doesn't swivel side to side. So when you are interacting with other parts of your desk, whether it's paperwork or the telephone, or you're reaching for a binder or the printer, or somebody walks in the door and you need to turn around to see them, you're going to have to twist your body to do that. It's also not unusual for somebody to get a desk in the workplace where the desk height is not right for them, or where there's stuff underneath the desk. There isn't enough room for your toes to clear, and then you end up leaning forward and arching your back and craning your neck and jutting your chin forward and straining your eyes to see things. These are all super, super critical things for you to care about, because you don't want to work in pain, and because you don't want to add to whatever degree of disability you already have. So again, there's a whole separate long conversation to be had about ergonomics, but I want to make the point at least briefly here and urge you to take some time to get out there and learn a little bit about this topic area. All right, so how do you find the jobs? Well, there are people who are actually out there looking for candidates with disabilities. And one of the places this happens is at one-stop centers. One-stop centers are also programs of the Department of Labor. They're not specific to disability, but they are inclusive of disability. These are actual physical locations staffed by job development and consultants, job development people who are there to help people find jobs. They have computers that you can sit down at and do job searches. Employers will specifically list jobs at these centers, sometimes even hold job fairs where employers will come interested in seeking candidates with disabilities. So check into the one-stop center that is closer to you. Career fairs are often held by organizations like Project Hired in Santa Clara, California, local universities, disabled student services offices will put on career fairs. There might be a Spinal Cord Injury Association chapter of some kind, and I say that generically, in your area. So take the time to look for disability-specific opportunities to get access to employers. As I said, disabled student services organizations, and the federal government themselves. The federal government has a very specific process. It's called Schedule A, that you can essentially register yourself at the website usajobs.gov, where you put in a resume and you become a Schedule A candidate for a job. And employers in the federal government actually get certain advantages. The process actually goes faster for candidates with disabilities when they're in this Schedule A process. So there's another thing for you to investigate. Right? Now, to help you be able to work, maybe you can't physically get to a job location every day of the job. So it is now possible to work remotely. In fact, there are jobs that are entirely remote jobs. I have a friend who is doing work from his home, where he's one of those people who answers the phones for customer support, for hotel rooms. I think he's also doing some work for fundraising, for public broadcasting. And this is a job where they actually hire people to do the job from the home. That's what it is. So telework is an option that you might want to explore if there's an issue in terms of transportation or your ability for whatever reason to not be able to physically be present full-time at a job. Companies are getting more enlightened in some cases with the idea of job sharing, that more than one person might do a job, and that means that you're doing a portion of a job and you don't have to take on the responsibilities of the entire job. But they also work this kind of stuff out so that people can still have access to benefits. And then, of course, there's the idea of opening your own business, of having an online business of some kind, of being a consultant of some kind, of developing a product that you sell yourself. All of these things are options for work. But in order to be able to do any of it, you need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you're addressing your general health so that you generally have energy and that you feel good and that you're not having to take time off because of illness. That's just a general issue for everybody. But of course there are some issues specific to paralysis. You want to protect yourself from pressure sores and from skin breakdown. Make sure that you're doing inspections. Make sure you're eating a diet that provides your skin with the nutrients that it needs through your bloodstream. Make sure you have proper cushioning, that you're doing pressure release, and whatever strategy that it is that you're using to protect your skin. Nothing makes a mess of work and more than pressure sores. Or urinary tract infections. You need to be sure that you're drinking enough water and getting to the bathroom often enough so that you don't get bladder infections. And that you want to use your energy carefully. You don't want to be unnecessarily fatiguing yourself. And by the way, that includes taking good care of your wheelchair, getting the right wheelchair and making sure that it's well configured and well maintained. If you're a manual wheelchair user, you want to make sure that you keep your tires full enough, because as your tires get softer, it actually gets harder to push the chair, and you coast shorter distances, so you have to do more pushes to go a given distance, and so on. I recently encountered somebody who has a caster that is like at an angle, and his chair constantly is turning to the right, and he's having to correct for that all the time. And he's not out there doing something about it to get it fixed immediately. The last webinar that I gave is on wheelchair selection. It is on the Reeve site at paralysis.org. And so you should, if you haven't already listened in on that one, please go and check that one out, because it's actually part of your success in the workplace. Now, I had the pleasure of giving a talk and then conducting a panel in Little Rock, Arkansas for the Arkansas Spinal Cord Commission. And this is a shot from the panel that I led, and let me first reassure you, I've given up the ponytail experiment. It was just a brief little phase. But anyway, these are 4 people, all wheelchair users, all working full-time. And it was a fascinating conversation, because what it really came down to with every single one of them is that once they had demonstrated to their employers that they were good at their job and that they cared about being good at their job, the employers were willing to do whatever it took for them to succeed. The gentleman on the end here, right here, he is quadriplegic, and they asked him to go on a trip, and he said in order to do that he was going to need some personal assistance services in the vicinity where he was going, and they said no problem. They contacted the local home care services organization, and they got him what he needed, because he's good at his job. They want to keep him, and they want to make sure that he's able to do what they need him to do. Okay. So, as I said, I've been through a variety of careers, and that's part of the way the world is now. In any case, people don't stay in the same job for long periods of time, though the fact is that people with disabilities actually do have very high retention rates and do tend to stay on the job longer statistically than a lot of people, if only because we tend to be afraid that, we don't want to have to go out there and go through the process of convincing somebody that they should hire us again, which is unfortunate. But also I think that we're more selective. We take the time to be sure that we get the job that we really want, and we really want to demonstrate to our employers that we're a good employee and they want to keep us. But it is really common to jump around, and my own personal story has just moved me from these different kinds of things. I actually left my graphic design career because I became injured by computing, which is why I was so passionate about ergonomics a few minutes ago. And so I did work and still do a little work with my own consultancy, doing training and workstation consultation. But when I had the chance to write Life on Wheels, that what set me on the course that I'm on now, which I'll be doing for the rest of my life, being a communicator of this disability experience and opening the path, hopefully, for many more people with disabilities to be able to pursue and achieve their potential, and for people with disabilities overall to be able to take their place in our culture. We're an emerging population of people, and it's an amazing thing that's happening, that society is transformed because of greater health, because of greater mobility, because we have a more accessible world that we function in, at least here in the West. Though I was in Korea and Japan this summer, and they're substantially accessible over there as well. So this is a global process that's happening, and we're all part of it, and work is very much a part of it. So you are on a path. The process of work, of finding work, of growing and evolving through your work is a path, and I hope that you will embrace it and enjoy the journey. And now we have 33 seconds left. No, I'm more than willing to stick around to answer any questions that you have. Let me first thank the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation and the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Resource for allowing me to share this information with you and putting it up on their website so it can be continually available to them. Please take the time to go to paralysis.org and learn about what they do and what they have to offer, because this is the quality of life side of the Reeve Foundation. The other side, of course, is focused on fundraising and granting monies for research. But they understand that while the scientists are out there doing their work of solving the puzzle of the spinal cord and the brain, that we all should have access to the highest quality of life available to us, and a very high quality of life is indeed available for everybody, because there are plenty of people out there proving it at whatever level of disability you might be able to name. So again, my thanks to them, my thanks to those of you who have attended live, and I'd be very, very happy to entertain any questions you might have.